Hello and welcome to the Grove Church Podcast. I'm Charlie Lofton, the lead pastor there, and we are so glad that you're joining us. Whether you are a member and you're just catching up on a sermon that you missed, or you're someone who's brand new, we are really glad that you are joining us. And if you are new in some way, and I know that a lot of people will do that, will listen to sermons first before they visit, I want you to know that we would love to meet you at any point. You can join us live in our services on Sunday, 9 and 10:30, or our streaming service at 10:30. Either way, we would love to be able to get to know you. And regardless of why you are here listening to this sermon today, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, good morning. Hey, if you are new, I am Charlie. I'm the lead pastor here, and really glad that all of you are here, especially if you're new. Glad you're visiting with us today, and we would love to know that you are here. There's a QR code you can scan that takes you to an online form. Let us know you are here. There's some people out there at the Connect desk right as you walk out that you can meet after the service. We'd love to get to know you. Any way that we can help you, serve you, support you, please let us know. Really glad that you're here. We are in the middle of a series on the 10 Commandments. We are wrapping that up next week. So, it's 1984. And there were a handful of us around, right? 1984. And my brother, I'm 12. My brother is 18. And we are watching MTV. Now, allow me to describe to you what MTV was like in the 80s. Some of you may not know. It was actually like a radio station back in the day, and it just played music mostly nonstop. And they would play music videos, and then there were these VJs, like DJs, that would introduce the videos, and they'd play a couple and then talk about what was played. There'd be news breaks. It was essentially a nonstop music channel. And my brother was really into music, and I was, at that time, really into anything that my brother was into. And so he was into music, I was into music, and we loved watching music videos on MTV. It was something that we would do a lot. It's 1984. I'm 12 years old. And again, you need to set the stage. 12 years old, very religious, Southern conservative household in El Dorado, Arkansas. And I remember this moment I remember this moment very vividly. When this video came on, it was just something like I had never seen before. It was by a group called Wham, and the song was Wake Me Up Before You Go Go. Now, you may not be familiar with this song, but it had a lot going on to it for a 12-year-old Southern conservative Christian in El Dorado, Arkansas. Now, I had gotten used to, at this point, at least a little bit, with the idea of a guy wearing one, stud earring. This was two hoops. It was very lively. There was a lot of neon things. He was wearing these little gloves. There was a lot of this. And I'm like, I don't know what to think about this. And so, as always, I looked to my brother, who was 18, and it was apparent we don't like this. So we didn't like it. It was a little much, right? But I will say with confidence, 40 years later, 52 years old, that song is a banger. And Wham produced a lot of great songs back in the day, and I'm comfortable enough now at this season of my life to publicly say so. But there was also this shirt that he was wearing, and the shirt on it said, "Choose life." Now, again, imagine a world, some of you lived it, imagine a world where you're wondering, I wonder what that means. I wonder why he's wearing that. And you have no means by which to find out why. There is no internet at all. I mean, you cannot find out why. I mean, we certainly did not read music magazines, and it certainly was not in the El Dorado News Times. I mean, they were like, why George Michael, what that meant, right? But I remember so much about that. And what part of it, this shirt, choose life. What does that mean? Why is he saying that? Where does that come from? So obviously, for some of you may know this, there's actually that phrase in the Bible. You'll find it in Deuteronomy chapter 30. It's actually at the very end of this entire section that we're looking at. We're going through the 10 Commandments, right? Genesis to Deuteronomy is kind of the story of the creation of the Israelite nation, the Exodus. They're going to the promised land. They're on the verge of the promised land. Moses is his last speech to them. He's not going to get to go with them because of some sin that he committed against God. But he's kind of giving a final speech to them. And kind of this is a summary of all the laws and all the things that he's talked to them about, including these 10 commandments. I've laid out a couple of different things for you here. You can still be in this sin over here. Or you can follow these rules and these laws that God has put before you. You've got the choice. And the choice is between death and life. Choose life. Now, it'd be hard for me to imagine that phrase, there's a place older than the Bible where that phrase is used. It's a choice that they're making. You have a choice between death and life. Choose life. You can now look up, what did George Michael mean by it? Turns out it was a statement he was making that he believed at the time that there was an insufficient response by the world, the U.S. government in particular, to respond to the AIDS pandemic back in the day. And that instead of allowing people, I feel like they're too casually allowing people to die. Instead, we should choose life. In the years since then, this phrase has been used a lot of different ways, a lot of different contexts. There is a pretty well-known suicide prevention advocacy network. That's their name. Choose life. It has also become a popular slogan for the pro-life movement when talking about abortion. You have a choice, choose life. It's a phrase, it's a very powerful phrase. And again, it is the summary statement that Moses gives to the people. You've got a choice to make in how you're going to live. And when you have a choice, choose life. So we're in the 10 Commandments, and we're in today what theoretically would be the least controversial one of them. It was the one I was talking to my wife last night, what are you talking about? And I said, we're going to talk about, I'm combining two of them. And the one that we're going to spend the most time about is the least controversial. You'd think you would have the least amount to say. Say, so you're just going to barely talk about that one, and you're really talk about this. It's like, no, I'm going to reverse it. She's like, well, I'm interested in what you got to say about that, because it's not a particularly controversial one. Exodus chapter 20, verse 13, you shall not murder. Highly unlikely here that anybody's like, I don't know about that, bro. And probably not many people in here like contemplating murder. And it's one of those things that it's one of those commands that makes us to feel the best about, right? If you ask somebody, hey, do you think you're going to heaven? Do you think you're a good person? It's a very common phrase people say. People say it all the time. I'm a pretty good person. I've never killed anybody. I'm like, pretty low bar that most of us have gotten over. Nonetheless, good for you. I mean, I don't want to say it's bad. Good for you. You have not murdered anyone, right? It feels not controversial at all. But imagine a time. Well, maybe it would have been maybe not controversial, but it would have had some real power, some real weight to it. And this idea, it comes from Genesis chapter 1, verse 26 and 27. And this is the thing that I believe that makes this command so powerful. Creation story, Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. Then God said, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. Now, most of you probably have some familiarity with that the Bible says that people are created in the image of God. And as such, we reflect the character and the heart of God. And that when God created people, he created them special. He created them unique. And they have this special place in creation. They have a special place in the heart of God. And because of that, human life matters tremendously. Okay, you probably already knew that, but just again, imagine a time. I don't know how familiar you are with ancient mythologies, right? There was a time when it would have been very different. It would have been new. It would have been surprising to say that human life matters in a really significant way. I am not a mythology expert. If we were going to talk about mythology, I would get my 12-year-old daughter, Layla, up here, and she could tell you anything and everything you wanted to know, and really not limited to just one branch. I mean, she could tell you a lot. But based on the limited amount that we know, without Layla here to help us, how did the gods view and treat people? Very often, creation was an accident. It's just something that just kind of happened. And they were treated like puppets, like playthings, things that didn't matter. The gods would be very casual with human life because it did not really matter. And so for God coming out of there, right out of the gate, Genesis chapter 1, as he's communicating to the people coming out of Egypt into this promised land, for him to communicate to them, you need to understand that each one of you, regardless of what you felt in slavery, every one of you matters. Your life matters. And the life of every person you encounter, whether they follow a different God, a different culture, whether they're your enemies or not, every life matters. Every person matters because every one of us is created in the image of God. Now we, followers of Jesus Christ, that is deeply profound to us. And if I believe that, if I believe that I am created in the image of God and everyone I encounter is created in the image of God, then as image bearers, we choose life. Sometimes life is complicated. Sometimes you find yourself in really difficult, unusual sorts of choices. But when there is a choice, when we have an opportunity to show the world who we are, when we have the opportunity to show the world who Jesus Christ is, when given the choice, when given the opportunity, because we are image bearers and because everyone here bears the image of God, when given the choice, we choose life. So it is in that context, the context of being that every person is a unique creation by God, created in his very own image and likeness. It is in that God says, do not take a life. Do not do it. Because life matters. And if we as his image bearers are going to choose life, how do we do that? We're just going to talk about a few simple ways that I believe that we can do that. And obviously the first one, the simplest, the most obvious one, is as image bearers we choose life, the first way we do that is by not taking life. I'm just not going to be involved in taking a life. Again, it is something that almost everyone here in this room has had no problem with. You know, some of us may have some military background and we've been in that situation before. But by and large, most of us have never been involved in taking life. This is what God says. Don't do it. Do not kill. Do not murder. Now, there was a time, again, reminiscing here. There was a time, you may find this really hard to believe, when it was possible to discuss with your friends who disagreed with you, to discuss politics with them, and to radically disagree with them, to ask each other questions, to challenge each other, and at the end, you're still friends and everything's fine. It was a wild time 20 years ago. And by and large, because of the situation we live in now, I don't really talk much about my political beliefs because I don't want that world to kind of creep into here. But today, we'll make a little exception because there was a time, I'll tell you about this time, about 20 years ago, we were in St. Louis, and then this friend of mine named John, he was an atheist, didn't really want to go to church, His wife and his kids did, and our families had a friendship, and he and I were building a friendship, and we would often play golf together. And one of the things that we really liked to do was talk about politics. And I remember this one day, I remember exactly what golf course we were on. I remember where we were talking about it. I was like, man, honestly, the more I think about it, the more I've kind of grown and thought. It's like I said, I think that what I would say about me is I take what I will call the full pro-life position. And he's like, what does that mean? I was like, well, I'm against abortion, I'm against the death penalty, and I tend to be against wars. And he kind of looked at me for a second and said, well, I guess that makes me pro-death. And I'm like, what? He's like, I'm for abortion, I like wars, and I'm for the death penalty. And we just kind of joked and laughed about it, and then we kind of sparred back and forth a little bit about it. But the interesting thing that we both came to was like, okay, based on that, where do we go to vote? Right? There was certainly no political party that represented those sorts of things. But there was a kind of a progression in my time from being a person who felt like I needed to fit into a particular political mold, pick one of the two, and to just kind of really personally just kind of growing and developing into what is the heart of God? And the heart of God is for life. He's for life. And the idea of taking another human life should be rare and should be rarely celebrated. And I know, again, because this has at least a foot, if not the whole self, here into the political realm. You know, there's some of you right now that are kind of a little shocked by it, a little kind of taken aback by it. And what happens when you're having these sorts of conversations is that people will immediately start to talk about, well, what about this? What about this? Kind of exceptions. What about this? What about this? They'll describe some particular scenario around abortion. Would you say that person should have to have the, or some gruesome scenario where a murderer kills someone you love? Should they have the death penalty? Or the go-to for World War II, should we have done nothing about that? It's like, and I get that. Sometimes there are very difficult choices that have to be made where it seems like in order to preserve life, you have to do some things that take life. I understand that nuance, and I understand that is a decision that political people have to make. You have to decide the regulations and the rules that kind of govern those sorts of things. Because ultimately for me, and I think what's happened in the 20 years since then, is that the things that I share with you, because I don't like to talk politics up here. The reason I feel comfortable with that, because it doesn't feel political at all to me anymore. It's not a political statement at all. It is a deep heart value statement that I believe that this is who God has called me to be. To be someone who advocates for the continuing of life whenever at all possible. Because what I believe is that no matter who someone is, what they've done, where they are, where they come from, where they're going, their values, their religion, everyone is created in the image of God. And God has given us a very specific mission to bring the hope and life of Jesus Christ who don't have it. And so the lives that I want to advocate for the most are the ones who are the furthest from God. Because I want them to have as many opportunities as possible to have not only capital L life in this life, but life with Him forever. And so it is a tragedy when life is lost. And we as God's people, regardless of how you vote, regardless of the politics of it, regardless of the nuances of particular situations, we are people who advocate for life. And there's a particular criticism that I hear from time to time as I'm engaging and listening to politics and especially around the issue of abortion as people are debating that. It's like, you people, you're not pro-life, you're pro-birth. Because you don't really care about the life after. You just want to make sure they carry the baby to term. You don't care about life. And honestly, there's a fair criticism. But when I say the full pro-life position, that is exactly what I mean. We are advocates for moms, no matter what situation they find themselves in. We are advocates for them when they're raising that baby. We are advocates for people who are experiencing poverty, who are experiencing homelessness, who need a place to live, who need a helping hand, who need some food, who need life in some way. We, as the people of God, bring life to people who need it. We advocate for people to keep life, and we advocate people to have life. This is who God has called us to be. When they encounter God's people, we bring life with us, and we encourage and advocate life now and life forever. This is who God has called us to be. We are advocates and supporters of life. But the thing that happens, like I said, we want to talk about the exceptions, and we want to talk about nuances, and we want to talk about these things. And the problem with that, by focusing on that rather than focusing on the value, is because there's this thing that tends to creep in, I believe, with some of us, where we talk about certain types of people and certain types of situations, and then we ultimately come to the conclusion that there are some people that are just a little less worthy of life. And so I believe that, again, as image bearers, we choose life, again, not by not taking it, but also by not dehumanizing people. By not dehumanizing. We recognize that every person we encounter is an image bearer. I'll give you a lighthearted example first. My family and I, a few weeks ago, we just got back from our, I will not say the number, it will be embarrassing to me, our nth trip to Disney World. And we were there together, and there's a phenomenon that happens there that can be really, really frustrating to me, because there are all these people out there at this thing. It's always crowded, but they're not people, right? There's man-made obstacles like carts and fences and poles and things you got to walk around to get from where you are to the ride you want to ride. There's those obstacles, and then there's the God-made ones too, right? They move and they're cunning, and you got to get around them. And what they're doing is they're trying to keep you from doing what you want to do. And there's a couple of them that are the worst. Like, you're behind somebody and you're just about to pass them, and then there's two of them. There's the diagonal walker, like you're just about to pass them, and then all of a sudden they're just. And then you just, or the person who in a huge crowded sidewalk, they're not exactly sure where they're going. And then sometimes I go, like, and we used to go when we had people with a stroller. We used to have kids that were in a stroller, and I was always saying, like, what if we put like a point? Because they're not people. They're not people. They're not people on vacation. They are obstacles to me. And we do this when we drive, right? You do this when we drive. These are not people living their lives trying to get from one place to another. They are people that are preventing you from getting to where you want to go. And you say things in your car, especially when you're by yourself. You say things, and by you, I mean me. You say things to them and about them that you would never say to a person, because they're not people in that moment. They are obstacles. And those are fairly silly, kind of harmless ways, but this kind of works its way into our politics. Those aren't real people. Those aren't people. Those are woke idiots. They're not people. They're MAGA. And somehow that's like a step down. Or we talk about people in other countries. The Russians, Palestinians, Hamas. We begin to talk about people in such a way where they become less than people. So the way we talk about it with each other, the politics that we engage with, the things that we post or read or participate in online, too often we get drawn into this idea that there are people worthy of being image bearers, and then there are people who are less than. And as God's people, as image bearers, we will not dehumanize because we always choose life. Because the interesting thing about Jesus is he never they'd anybody. There was never them. There's us and there's them. And in the culture in which he lived, the people who were most them were the people that he loved the most, the people that he reached out to, the people he brought life to. He was accused so often by just being a little too friendly with them. But we as God's people, carriers of his image and recognizing that everyone is a carrier of his image, we're not going to take life. And we're not going to dehumanize people to create anybody, regardless of what they've done, who they are, or where they live, what they're experiencing. We're never going to dehumanize them because we choose life. Now, again, we've got one more. We got one more command that we're going to talk about today. And I do believe it, again, it kind of encourages and enforces this idea that we as image bearers of God, that we choose life when given the opportunity. We're not going to take life, we're not going to dehumanize people, and we're not going to lie. By not lying. And again, a very straightforward command here. Exodus chapter 20, verse 16. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. Now, we use that. We kind of shorthand. We kind of describe it as lying. Don't lie, right? There are plenty of verses that kind of use a more overarching term to describe lying. Don't lie. Don't lie. This, don't give false testimony against your neighbor, really is kind of a subset. It is a particular type of lying. But again, if you think about the values that God is advocating his people to have, think about finding yourself in a situation where you have the opportunity to give a false testimony about your neighbor. So you are in court, or you are wanting to take someone to court. You have a beef against someone, or they've got something against you, and you have the opportunity to give testimony about them and about the situation. And if I say something that isn't true about you, and I don't like you, if I say something that's not true, something bad will happen to you, and or something good will happen to me. And if it's good for me and it's bad for you, that's great. I'll say whatever I have to say to get something good for me and something bad for you, because ultimately you don't matter, only I matter. There's a phrase that gets used a lot now in certain circles called main character syndrome. So you imagine a video game where you're just single player and you're playing this game and you're on these quests or whatever, and there's all these other people that are in the game, but they're controlled by the computer. They're called non-playable characters, NPCs. They're not real people. There's just you, and you can do whatever you want to them or say whatever you want to them, and if it will help you with your quest, with whatever it is your tactic is, because they're not real people. Too many people live their regular life like that. I am the main character, and you exist either to support me or to help me. And if you're not doing those things and you are hindering me, then you are less than, and I can say or do whatever. And so I'm willing to say something that is not true about you in order to advocate for myself, in order to get what I want, to harm you, to hurt you in some way. And honestly, all lying is like that to some degree. You don't have to be in some sort of formal trial or case of some kind. I could tell you the truth, but when do we lie? We lie when it is to our advantage to lie. It is better for me to say this instead of that. Even the most innocent of lies, well, I don't want to hurt your feelings. Well, I don't want to be the one that hurts your feelings. Again, it very often kind of reflects an attitude of what is best for me. If the truth is what is best for me, you get the truth. If a lie is what is best for me, you get a lie. because I am something and you're a little less. But this is not who God's people are. That is not bringing life to people. That is choosing you over them rather than choosing for them to have life. Again, I understand that we live in a world of incredible complexities, where political decisions are hard and sad decisions, less than ideal decisions have to get made, where bad things happen. Bad things are a consequence. And again, there's a whole lot of nuance even around the idea of lying. There's a couple of examples in the Bible where it seems like people are lying for a good cause, for a good reason, and have no rebuke of that. I understand. The world is immensely complex. And the decisions that we have often can be incredibly complex. But without getting lost in the nuance, without getting lost in exceptions to the rule, we have a decision to make. A decision very similar to the one that Moses is putting forth before the people. You have a way of living life that lives life like this, the old ways, your own values, choosing selfishness, choosing sin, or you can be God's people. You have these two choices. And Moses looks at them and says, choose life. And we have a choice. Are we going to be people who live in this system, playing the rules, playing the game by their rules of dehumanizing, of making some people feel less than? Are we going to be advocates for the God of the universe who created each person in his own image and who wants each person not only to live life here, but to have life with him forever through Jesus Christ? And given those choices, let's choose life. Let me pray. God, I do. And the world we live in is difficult. It's complicated. It can feel overwhelming. And it's easy to get swept up in a world and a system full of so much anger, full of so much hate, and full of so much death. And God, I pray in the middle of that, that your people, we, would choose to be advocates for life. That in the way that we talk, in the way that we serve, in the way that we give, in the way that we live our lives, that we would be known as people who give and bring life wherever we go. And given the choice between a world full of destruction and despair and life with you, God, let us choose life. And it's in your Son's name we pray. Amen.
Thanks again for joining us on our sermon podcast, and you can learn more about us at thegrovechurch.org. And if you go to thegrovechurch.org/connect, there's a form you could fill out. Just let us know that you've been listening. And if you want to dig deeper on some of these topics that we cover in our sermon podcast, or just in other issues of dealing with culture or theology, those kinds of things, you can check out our Cultivate podcast, which is on the same feed, however you found this particular podcast. So again, this is Charlie, the lead pastor at The Grove, and thank you so much for joining us.